I returned home earlier than planned. The plane landed 3 hours earlier, and I immediately took a taxi, not even waiting for a transfer. I wanted to surprise my wife. We hadn't seen each other much lately, and it didn't just seem strange to me, it scared me. She became distant and cold, although she tried not to show it. I blamed it on fatigue, work, and other things, but somewhere deep inside I felt that something had changed. I even thought that maybe the problem was with me. Maybe I didn't pay enough attention to her. Maybe I didn't notice her signs, didn't ask her how she was doing, didn't give her compliments. In the taxi, I looked out the window for a long time, thinking about what I would say when I got in. Would she be happy to see me? Will she drop everything and hug me? Or would she be surprised but embarrassed? I could even imagine her smiling, running out of the kitchen, surprised, wiping her hands on a towel. We open a bottle of wine, sit on the couch, and talk. Just like it used to be, to make the evening special, I stopped at a flower shop near our house. I bought roses, even though I knew she didn't like bouquets that were too lush. It's too much, she always said, one beautiful bud is better than a whole bunch. I bought 3, I didn't want it to look like I was making up for my absence or apologizing for anything. The car stopped at the house, and I immediately felt something wrong. The bedroom light was on. This shouldn't have been alarming, but I knew her habits. She always turned off the light when she went downstairs or to another room. I walked closer. The car was still there, so she was home. I quietly put the key in the lock and turned it. I didn't want to make any noise, I didn't want to warn her about my arrival. I wanted to make a surprise. The door opened and I froze. The house was quiet, but at the same time I could definitely hear something, a muffled voice. A man's voice. I closed my eyes sharply, as if it would help. It could have been the phone. It could have been the TV. But I did not hear my wife's answers. Only this voice. Deep, calm, confident. He was saying something, and she was laughing. She laughed like she hadn't laughed with me in a long time. My heart began to pound so hard that I thought I could hear it in the corridor. I stepped forward. Slowly, very slowly, so as not to give myself away. The voice came from upstairs, from the bedroom. I took another step and realized that my hands were shaking. A burning sensation rose from my chest to my throat. I tried to breathe steadily, forced myself to stay calm, but something had already burst inside me. Something invisible but very important. I went up to the second floor, stepping carefully, although my brain was already screaming, "What are you doing? Stop!" But I couldn't. I heard movement. The rustling of a sheet. Her voice, a little quieter than before, and her husband's response. I stood in front of the door. I put my hand on the handle. I knew that behind that door was the truth. The one I might not want to know. But I opened it anyway. I opened the door and froze. The light in the bedroom was dim, the air saturated with the subtle scent of her perfume mixed with something else, something unfamiliar. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hardly hear anything else. My eyes quickly darted around the room. There she was, on the bed, wearing one of those silk pajamas I had once bought her for our anniversary. She was sitting with her legs tucked up, phone in hand. There was no man in the room. But I could hear him. She looked up sharply, noticing me, and an expression flashed across her face that I couldn't immediately decipher. It was not just surprise. There was something more there, surprise, fear, maybe even guilt. Are you home already?" Her voice was a little too calm, as if she was trying to hide something. Yes, I was still trying to figure out what was going on here. I heard a voice. Who were you talking to? She hesitated for a second, and then smiled, but it didn't look natural. It was just a friend. We were talking on video. I took a few steps into the room, looking closely at her phone. It was lying with the screen down. Friend? I couldn't believe what I thought I heard. She again hesitated for a moment before answering and then shrugged. Perhaps someone was visiting her. Her explanation sounded logical. Almost. But something didn't add up in my brain. I took another step and picked up my phone from the table before she could stop me. The screen was blank. No active call. No open video conversation. I slowly looked up at her. She was no longer smiling. Now her face was stone. What are you looking for? Her voice changed. It became colder. The truth, I answered quietly, and it was at that moment that I realized she was lying. But what was she hiding? She looked at me, and I saw several emotions mixing in her eyes at the same time. Surprise, anger, maybe even fear. Her fingers were slightly curled into fists, and her jaw was tense. I knew her well. Too well. And I knew that this was how she behaved when she couldn't find the right words. You don't trust me? Her voice sounded quiet, but there was something sharp, almost accusatory in it. I do. I paused. But do you trust me? She did not answer. She just took the phone out of my hands and looked away. I could see her chest rise and fall as she tried to collect her thoughts. I don't know what you want me to say, she finally said, sighing. It was just a misunderstanding. I was talking to a friend, her husband was there, and you heard something wrong. I would like to believe that. I really would. But one thing kept bothering me. If it was just a conversation, why did you get so scared when you saw me? She looked up at me, and there was something new in her eyes. Irritation, because you burst into the room like I was doing something terrible. Her voice was sharper. You scared me, Owen. I took a deep breath. She was turning the tables, making me feel guilty. That was typical of her, too. But I didn't want a fight. Not right now, okay. I held my hands up to show that I didn't want to continue. Maybe I'm really exaggerating. It's just, it was weird. And I'm tired. I took a step back, watching the tension slowly leave her face. She nodded, but still seemed too tense. Are you hungry? She asked after a short pause. No, I think I'll just take a shower and go to bed. Okay. I turned and went to the bathroom, but when I closed the door behind me, I didn't turn on the water. Instead, I stood there and looked in the mirror, trying to understand what had just happened. She had lied to me. I could feel it, but why? She was looking at me, and I could see several emotions mixing in her eyes at the same time. Surprise, anger, maybe even fear. Her fingers were slightly clenched into fists, and her jaw was tense. I knew her well. Too well. And I knew that this was how she behaved when she couldn't find the right words. You don't trust me? Her voice sounded quiet, but there was something sharp, almost accusatory in it. I do. I paused. But do you trust me? She didn't answer. She just took the phone out of my hands and looked away. I could see her chest rise and fall as she tried to collect her thoughts. I don't know what you want me to say, she finally said, sighing. It was just a misunderstanding. I was talking to a friend, her husband was there, and you heard something wrong. I would like to believe that. I really would. But one thing kept bothering me. If it was just a conversation, why did you get so scared when you saw me? She looked up at me, and there was something new in her eyes. Irritation. Because you burst into the room like I was doing something terrible. Her voice was sharper. you scared me, Owen." I took a deep breath. She was turning the tables, making me feel guilty. That was typical of her, too. But I didn't want a fight. Not right now, okay? I held my hands up to show that I didn't want to continue. Maybe I'm really exaggerating. It was weird. And I'm tired. I took a step back, watching the tension slowly leave her face. She nodded, but still seemed too tense. "Are you hungry?" she asked after a short pause. "No, I think I'll just take a shower and go to bed." "Okay." I turned and went to the bathroom, but when I closed the door behind me, I didn't turn on the water. Instead, I stood there and looked in the mirror, trying to understand what had just happened. She had lied to me. I could feel it, but why? I took a breath. Deeply. Slowly. But it didn't help. My hands were still shaking, my heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed to be heard in the silence of the house. I read the message again. "He's back. I'll tell you when it's safe." Safe for whom? For her? For him? For both of them. My first thought was obvious: she has a lover and she's warning him that I'm home. That should have made me angry. It should have made me scream, throw the phone against the wall, burst into the bedroom and demanded an explanation. But I did none of those things. Instead, I calmly scrolled up the dialogue, and what I saw made me freeze. The messages were strange. No "I love yous," no intimate things. Instead, short, restrained phrases: "Everything is under control. He doesn't suspect anything. The main thing is to wait." This was not a conversation between lovers. It was something different. I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe it wasn't about cheating at all. I entered the number she sent the message to in my contacts search. Nothing. Not a single name. Just a number. I sighed and pressed call. The phone barely had time to emit a short dial tone when I heard a noise from behind me. "What are you doing?" I turned sharply. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, her face as white as chalk. Her eyes were wide open. But not from anger. It was fear. She was afraid, not for me, she was afraid for herself. I looked at her, and she looked at me. The room was so silent that you could hear the time passing. Her chest rose and fell quickly, as if she had just run a marathon. But she was not angry. She didn't scream, didn't try to snatch the phone out of my hands. She was afraid. "What are you doing?" she repeated, but her voice was shaking. I slowly turned my gaze from her to the phone screen. The call hadn't ended yet, but no one was answering. I pressed the end button and put the phone on the table. "I could ask you the same question," I said calmly, although I was seething inside. "Who were you texting with?" She stuttered and then bit her lip. "It's not what you think." "What do you think I think?" I took a step forward, she stepped back. Only a few centimeters, but I noticed it. "Owen, I can explain." Her voice broke, and she clenched her hands into fists as if she was preparing for something terrible. "Then explain it." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to control my breathing, "because from the outside it looks like you're hiding something." She was silent for a long time. Too long. Then she turned sharply and walked quickly to the window. She looked out into the darkness of the night, and her shoulders trembled slightly. "I can't," she finally whispered. "You can't?" I repeated, and my voice became hard. She slowly turned to me. "If I tell you the truth, you won't understand. You wouldn't believe me. Try me." She ran her palm through her hair, as if trying to collect her thoughts. Then she took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "It's not another man," she said quietly. "It's something worse." My heart clenched. Worse? What could be worse than betrayal? I'm in trouble, Owen. She lowered her head, and if you don't do what I tell you right now, you will be too. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling the air grow heavy. My body tensed, ready for something I couldn't understand. Her words echoed in my head, I'm in trouble. And if you don't do what I say now, you will be too. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I couldn't. My mouth suddenly went dry. It didn't feel like a betrayal anymore. It didn't sound like some banal excuse or justification. It sounded like a warning. In trouble? I finally said. Forcing myself not to raise my voice, she lowered her head, her fingers clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her shoulders shook as if she was fighting with herself. I didn't want you to know, she finally said, not looking up. Protect me from what, Lauren? I took a step toward her, but she stepped back. Was she afraid of me? Or was she afraid to tell me the truth? She closed her eyes tightly and then sighed and finally looked at me. There was no more anger or irritation in her eyes. There was only fear. Do you remember that man who came up to us in the restaurant a few weeks ago? Her voice was barely audible. I tensed up. Which man? Tall, graying hair. Expensive suit. He said he knew me, but you could see I tensed when I saw him. I was trying to remember. And suddenly that moment came to me. The restaurant. The anniversary. Lauren was really acting strange then. A man came up to us, smiled, and said something like, "It's been a long time." At the time, I thought it was some old friend of hers. But now, it wasn't just an acquaintance, was it? I said slowly, watching her carefully. She shook her head. He worked for a man. A very dangerous man. I felt a chill run down my spine. And what do you want from him? She looked at me as if she was about to say something terrible, not to me. He needs something from me. I tensed up even more. What is it? Lauren didn't say anything. I could see her lips trembling, her hands clenching, her eyes darting away again. Lauren. This time I couldn't keep my voice down. She flinched. And then she finally said, "They want me to do a job for them. In exchange for leaving me, and you, alone." I felt my insides go cold. What job? She swallowed hard and then said the words that made me realize I no longer recognized my own wife. "I had to betray you, Owen. But not in the way you think." I felt all the strength leave my body. Those words hit me like a punch. It wasn't just a simple betrayal, it was something else, and I saw fear in her eyes that couldn't be hidden. She stood in front of me, looking like she was ready to cry, but at the same time she was holding herself as best she could, as if she was trying to keep herself in check. "What are you saying?" I could barely get the words out because my breath was coming out of my mouth. Lauren sighed heavily and lowered her head. It was as if she was searching for the right words, but they didn't come. I stood there waiting, but I didn't know if I wanted to know the answers to my questions. Thousands of thoughts were running through my head, but none of them could explain what was happening now. It was like I was trapped, and it was unpredictable. "You don't understand, Owen," she said quietly, "this isn't what you're imagining. It wasn't just a physical betrayal. It was an operation. I was forced to take part in something much worse." I started to feel my heart beating faster. My hand clenched into a fist. I could feel my breathing getting harder. "Surgery? What surgery, Lauren? What are you talking about?" She closed her eyes and was silent for a few seconds, as if trying to find the courage. When she opened them, I saw the sheer terror in her eyes. "He works with a group that deals with special tasks. They are looking for people to make them perform certain actions. I was chosen. And I had no choice. My head exploded with new information. She said she had no choice, but she was not only forced to do it, she was involved in something darker than I could even imagine. What kind of assignment? I asked with a crack in my voice, and I could feel every word weighing like a stone. Lauren bowed her head as if she couldn't meet my gaze. I had to gather information, for them. They were looking for weaknesses in the company you'd been opening up in recent months. They knew you had become powerful, and it was no accident. They wanted to control your company. I had to help them get access to your data. My mind could barely keep up with her words. All the events of the last few months began to form an incredibly dark picture. All the things I thought were just coincidences or minor problems had become part of a bigger game that someone was playing with me. You were working for them? And I didn't even know? I couldn't contain my despair. My hands started to shake. It all began to take on a completely different meaning. And now I realized, our whole story was built on a lie. I didn't want this. She took a step back as if she was afraid to get close to me. They told me that if I didn't agree, they would do everything to destroy you. They promised they would leave you alone, but I had to do what they said. I stood there listening to her and felt despair and anger overwhelm me. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even imagine what she was really going through. But one thing was clear, she was part of something much bigger, and I wasn't ready to understand it. You should have told me, I said, but my voice was hard and cold. You should have told me about this when I started noticing something strange. Lauren lowered her head, her eyes were full of tears, but she remained silent. She couldn't go back in time, she couldn't change what had happened. And I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her. I stood there, feeling every word she said penetrate deeper into me. I couldn't believe it was real. She was not just a traitor in the usual sense of the word. She was part of something bigger, and I was now caught up in it. And at the same time, it was hard for me to understand if there was anything else I could do to stop it. You realize you could be in danger? I couldn't help but ask. You weren't just acting of your own free will. You were in this game, Lauren, and now I'm a part of it. She looked up at me, but her eyes were full of horror and shame. She didn't answer, and again I felt like I was talking to nothing. Who are these people? What do they want from us? I asked, no longer knowing what exactly I expected from her. I was just trying to understand what was going on. I can't tell you everything. Her voice was shaking, and I noticed her hands clenching into fists again. These are powerful people, and if I talk, they won't just leave us alone. They will destroy us both. I could feel my nerves gradually giving out, and I tried to hold on, even though I knew this situation was beyond anything I could have imagined. Her secrets weren't just about our marriage, they were about my safety, my company, and even my closest friends. What do you want me to do? I asked, not knowing if there was any answer to that question at all. Lauren took a deep breath and said quietly, I don't want you to fall into their hands. I have one chance to get out of this, and if I take it, you'll be safe too. I raised my eyebrows. My logic couldn't grasp what she meant. If she had a chance to get out, why didn't she just run away from all these people? What did she mean by that? How are you going to do that? I asked, trying to understand. She looked at me, and I saw something new in her eyes, determination. I have to meet with them. I have to talk to their leader. And if I convince them that I am no longer needed, they will leave us alone. But you don't have to know the details. You just have to be ready. They might come for us again if I do something wrong. I realized that her words were true. It was no longer just a matter of betrayal or bad decisions. It was a matter of life and death for both of us. Lauren, I I can't just sit here and wait for you to figure this out for yourself, I said, my voice firm. I'll be there for you. If they come for you, I'll be there to protect you. She looked at me with doubt. You don't understand, Owen. Her voice trailed off and she took a few steps back. This is much more serious than that. It's not just a group of people who want information. It goes much deeper than that. And you can't just walk into this thinking it's going to be resolved overnight. They could kill us, Owen. They won't let us live if we do the wrong thing. I could feel my heart sinking, a chill running down my spine. But at the same time, I realized I couldn't just stand by. She was my wife, and I couldn't leave her alone with this dark force. I couldn't let her do it all alone. I won't leave you, Lauren, I said firmly. We'll be in this together, even though I don't know how it's going to end. But I will be there for you. She didn't say anything, but I could see her eyes changing. Maybe she wanted me to leave her, to just stay out of her business. But that was no longer an option. We had to fight together. They came 2 days later. Lauren was ready, but I could feel every minute dragging on like a year. She was trying to be calm, but I could see her hands shaking and her constantly checking her phone messages. We had already agreed on a plan of action. Would stay at home, and she would go to the meeting with them. I couldn't be there, because if someone suspected me of being involved in this operation, things could have ended very badly. Lauren told me that I should wait for her safely, in another place, and that if things went wrong, she would send a signal and I would have to act quickly. I couldn't leave her alone, but her determination was stronger. I promised her that I would wait. And only when she returned would I know what to do next. The day they came was quiet. The fog covered the city, and I couldn't see anything from where I was, and all my calls went unanswered. I was worried about every second, because I could feel the changes in the atmosphere around me getting stronger and stronger. But Lauren promised me that she would solve everything. Every moment seemed like a lifetime, but eventually she came back. There was pain in her eyes, but also relief. We are safe, she said, coming to me. They agreed. They let us go. I started to relax, but Lauren hadn't finished her story yet. But, Owen, this is not the end. This is just the beginning. Now they're going to be watching us. And I know they won't leave us alone. We need to be prepared for anything. She stood up, looking at me, and I realized that she hadn't just come to see me. She had brought not only physical safety, but a new reality for us. We could not go back to what we had before. Our lives became part of something bigger, and we had to learn to live with it. We can handle it, I said, feeling for the first time that I was in control of the situation. We'll get through this together. And although I still had many questions, I realized that I didn't have the answers yet. I just knew that Lauren and I were on the same path now. And no matter what happened next, I wouldn't leave her alone anymore. And although it wasn't the ending I had hoped for, it was a new beginning. A new reality that we had to accept and change in our favor.